The Razr has seen numerous design changes over the year, and with the flipping Android versions, it moves away from that OG design. This is a Motorola razr Plus from 2023, and today I'm going to tell you about my experience with this phone, which, in experience, it is. Hello everyone, this is Matt from Real World Review, and I think it's time for me to review the razr Plus. Let's get started. Now the screen is awesome, but very strange. Of course, being a folding phone, we have the inside screen, which has slowly become a massive 6.9-inch 1080p OLED display that looks pretty good at about 413 pixels per inch and a 22:9 screen ratio. For a folding or flipping phone, that ratio is pretty standard nowadays, but becomes the narrowest razr ever. This runs at 165 Hz, I think. See, generally after 90 Hz, it's hard to really tell a difference, and we also have to note that some apps only run at 60 Hz, but my issue is that I see frame drops, which is strange for what the processor is, but even stranger for the fact that this happens with even stock apps. Now it's probably going to be impossible for me to actually show you, but apps hanging or lagging seems to be about a 5 to 10% of the time sort of thing, which maybe something's happening in the background and that explains it, but even then, it's kind of disappointing for the processor. So I say 165 Hz, but I'm not sure if that even happens, and even in games, most only hit 60 or 90 Hz, with none of the games that I play hitting 120 Hz. If you have any recommendations for 120 Hz games, let me know, and I'll talk to you guys in the comments. But viewing looks pretty good. It isn't the highest quality or brightest screen, but it does support HDR at 1400 nits, but I would guess that it normally operates at about 450 nits, but boosts in direct sunlight. Yes, there's obviously going to be a crease, but it's a Samsung Z Flip style crease, not like the 2020 razr that I reviewed. There is a hole punch for the front camera, but the screen is so big that I barely ever notice it. Also, it's weird calling it a front camera when you have front cameras on the front. It also does the normal folding features like normal folding phones, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. Once we close the phone, we see a hint of the screen. Once we unlock the screen, you realize it's a one-of-a-kind screen with 3 holes in it. This ends up being a 3.6-inch 1056p OLED screen, which is so close to being the classic BlackBerry 1:1 screen ratio and gives us the same 413 pixels per inch as you get on the inside screen. This one is slightly a step down, being a 144 Hz display compared to the inside one, but the same rules apply. This feels like a 60 or 90 Hz, not 144. Quality is good, but the size is what makes it weird and makes me realize even Motorola can't make me like flipping phones. And of course, if you didn't know by now, I'm not really a fan of flip phones, and here's why. We have the screen, which is almost half the size of the inside screen, so it makes sense to just stay using that one instead of flipping the phone if it's not easy to do. But when does that ever happen? Brightness is about the same as the inside screen, though peak brightness is about 1100 nits. With all that said, using the outside screen is not how I planned it to be. For some reason, tap to wake doesn't work every time, but when it does, it brings up the ambient display, just like moving the phone. It is strange to see a Motorola phone not react when you put your phone over it. I loved having that feature in the past. I don't know why they don't do it on this phone. As for unlocking the phone, it can be set up so all you have to do is just lift up your phone, let the phone scan your face, or touch the fingerprint scanner and the phone unlocks. On the screen, you can see that you can set up a bunch of slides that are essentially full screen widgets, but just like previous razrs, you can also run full apps on here. This is cool and continues when opening up the phone and actually works for most apps, unlike the original razr that I reviewed. I do say most apps. Some of the apps will continue or they'll just refresh the whole app, and sometimes that'll happen when you do the reverse when closing the phone. They also give you the option for continuity either automatically, off, or on demand, which the last one is my favorite to do because sometimes you don't want to switch it, but also sometimes you do. But here's the biggest problem about the outside screen. Some of the apps are just horrible. Trying to do navigation and drive? Good luck. Just open up the phone before you crash trying to focus on that small screen. Instagram type apps will work, but it doesn't show you the full image or videos, so you're gonna have to open up the phone. YouTube works, but ironically the preview shows a bigger video than when you're actually watching the video. And you can't do full screen for some reason. To be fair, there are some apps that work perfectly fine, not to mention the built-in games that you have to access here first before being able to awkwardly play them on the internal screen. I don't know why you can't open them from the inside. All of this does make you wonder why you even stick to the outside screen when simply opening up the phone will give you a way better experience. Also, if you haven't noticed, you don't get the full screen, more of like a sideways palm phone screen. And no, there's no setting for the full screen, just a few apps that use the full screen. Actually, I think it's literally just the camera app. Honestly, I can go all day talking about the weirdness of these screens, but using them seems to be perfectly fine. I never really had an issue touch-wise, with the swipe gestures working pretty well, but some strange things can happen with the outside screen if you have a case on. Honestly, skip the case and just, I don't know, be careful with your glass, metal, and plastic phone. This was another one that had me really confused. The choices for this phone were strange, to say the least, but also confused me. While the Zenfone 9 and this have the same processor, the Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 chip, the Zenfone 9 is the fastest phone that I own. They match in RAM with 8GB, with the Razr allowing for an extra 2GB of RAM boosting. They both feature UFS 3.1 storage, with the Razr coming with 256GB stock. But when running tests, Antutu gave me about a 17% performance increase when compared to the Razr Plus, and Geekbench 6 was a 7 to 11% difference. Even when playing games, the Razr Plus is just not the best. I would assume this was because of thermal throttling, but tests show similar resting temperatures on both phones and the same temperature increase during the test. The Razr Plus is just slower. I notice this in games and just day-to-day actions, which would explain some of the frame drops that I see. I'm not sure if it's just not optimized or what's going on, but for most people it won't be a huge issue. It is still fast and doesn't lag that much. I did find times, again, I don't know how I'm going to show this on camera, but I would open up a text or something on the outside screen and the phone would just freeze for a good 5 to 10 seconds. And then it would just load whatever I was doing. It's just so strange to see that happen on a 4th generation version of a phone made by a company like Motorola, which does well with terrible processor phones. Battery life, though, is normal. I wouldn't call this a battery champ or a battery drinker, but it's pretty fair for that 3,800 milliamp total batteries that are in this phone, which I assume that there's 2 in here. Lasting all day is easy to do and expected. Now, you're clearly wondering what happens if I use the outside screen, and the answer is nothing. Using the outside screen all day resulted in a battery history that showed me 0 minutes of screen usage, awesome, and when testing by myself, about a 1 to 2% battery difference per hour for the usage. So let's assume that it's about a 5% battery drain per hour on the inside screen compared to 3.5% battery drain on the outside screen. You should expect maybe a 5 to 10% difference in battery life by the end of the day. Again, you can use the outside screen to open almost any app, but the experience might be terrible and the savings are outright just not worth the hassle. As for charging, this is capable of 30 watts of wired and 5 watts of wireless charging, with the former being pretty fast, while the latter is acceptable for most bedsides. No reverse wireless charging here, which the feature isn't normal on a Razr phone. I just had it on my Edge Plus, and I thought that this phone might have it as well, but I guess not. As for connectivity, we get 5G, of course, but we don't get millimeter wave. We also get Wi-Fi 6E, Bluetooth 5.3 support, and of course NFC. The USB-C port is annoying to me, being 2.0, so sure, 256GB standard of internal storage, but transferring that through a cable will take a while. In classic Razr style, there's no headset jack, and in classic Motorola style, this is only IP52 dust and water resistant, which makes me want to do a disassembly video of this phone. Talking about the frame of the phone, let's close it up. So of course on the top of the phone we get glass and metal, being Gorilla Glass Victus, and a Series 700 aluminum for the frame. There are 3 holes in the front screen, 1 for the flash and 2 for the rear cameras of the phone. The left side is where we get the SIM tray, though we do get eSIM support, and the right side is where we get the power and volume buttons with a little microphone. And yes, the fingerprint scanner is built into the power button, which is always nice to see. On the top we get a nameless hinge. I guess it's fine, but weird coming from a Samsung flip phone. Then on the bottom we might as well talk about all of it, because the bottom half is the same aluminum from the top, just with nothing on the sides. The bottom is where the other 2 microphones are, as well as the loudspeakers, which pair with the other side for a dual speaker setup. The sound quality is acceptable, but it is definitely not loud. Then like I said, we get a USB-C 2.0 port, which is just sad. Then on the back we either get glass or vegan leather, depending on what color you chose, but the black one has a matte glass back, Gorilla Glass Victus, just like the front, just with a centered Motorola logo and a lowercase Razr. Fun fact, Motorola lowercases pretty much everything now, but back in the OG Razr days, they would capitalize all the letters. I think they started lowercasing back in 2012 with the Moto X, but it's really hard to say. Opening up the phone, the screen is plastic, just like the trim around it. Always be careful here. Lastly, this is a tall phone at 170 millimeters when opened and 15.1 millimeters thick when closed. But at 188.5 grams, it's pretty reasonable for the weight and the size, especially when you open it up. As you may know, Motorola isn't really known for their cameras. I like the idea of them, but in practice you get some meh-styled shots. Starting with the larger sensor, the front camera. Okay, not the largest, but the largest in megapixels being 32 megapixels, that bends down to 8 megapixels if you choose. Quality is okay, neither being good or bad, just like the max 4K 60 frames per second video that you can use for vlogging. Remember, you can angle the hinge, but I guess you can't really shoot landscape. Why does no one think about this? Even the Z Flips don't do this. Also, FPS is just out in the open, but when you switch to the rear sensors, it goes into this drop-down menu. Why? Either way, you get a 12 megapixel wide, which is optically stabilized for normal shots, while the other sensor is a 13 megapixel ultra wide that is focusable, meaning that you get natural macro shots. Yes, these can both be used for the front screen as well, and technically you can do macro shots, but why? Video is weird, being 4K 60 frames per second max on the wide, 4K 30 on the ultra wide, and macro is 4K 30 as well. But if you have 4K 30 on macro, you can't go back to the straight ultra wide because you need to hit this toggle to make it go back to 1080p 30, but you can just toggle it back to 4K 30. Not sure why this bug exists, but it does. For me, these sensors aren't enough, but there are a decent amount of capture modes. Also, you can do this tent mode, which moves with how the phone is positioned. It's pretty cool, but let me just show you some of these shots. Enjoy. Usable for sure, and better than nothing. Okay, honestly, they're on par with most folding and flipping phones. I wanted to love this phone. I wanted to recommend this phone over the Z Flip, and honestly, I still do. The frame is reminiscent of the Z Flip and Z Flip 5G, which makes this phone feel kind of dated, but the processor and screen quality, while not the best, is still better than previous phones. What frustrates me though is the 2022 version of the Razr is the same processor, same RAM, and same storage, which then makes me feel like Motorola has no excuse to make this phone better performance-wise. How is this phone not on par with the Zenfone 9 when they've already had two versions to focus on that processor? Still, this phone looks like a good phone and gets us closer to having folding phones with a purpose, but having tiny screens out here, while cool, isn't the answer. I still am a believer that flipping phones have no purpose while folding phones are truly the future. There is so much customization and Motorola-only features that are put into this phone that would make you consider buying this phone over any other ones, but even that can't make me change my mind on how flipping phones are. The phone is smaller, which is true, but only in one aspect. The height of the phone is smaller for sure, but only when that's closed. The width of the phone is the same, but the front screen has huge bezels, technically. And the thickness of the phone in your pocket is almost double my iPhone 14 Pro, an already thick phone. So this becomes a way bulkier phone than a normal one, but I guess I can agree that it is sometimes smaller. All of the sacrifices that are made to get to this shape just aren't worth it. Not yet, at least. At the end of the day, I'm over 2,400 words into this review, so clearly there's a lot to talk about when dealing with this phone. I like the tent mode idea, where you can have an app on the outer screen like this. It's pretty cool for recipes and such. But at the end of the day, I don't see how people can spend money on a flip phone of any sort and say that they actually enjoy it. It's a cool design and idea, but it gets old really quickly, especially when you don't want to unfold your phone all the time. It is definitely a conversation starter, a throwback, and a non-Apple or Samsung product that I wish could succeed, but I only have so much money to give to Motorola. They need to focus on making folding phones. Give me a chunky phone that has like a 10-inch tablet screen inside. Heck, give me a folding phone that is shaped like two Nexus 6s and call it a day. I'll throw $1,800 at that. There is still so much to learn about this phone and much more to question. Will we move from Android 13? How many years of software updates are left? Will the hinges hold up? Only time will tell. And this concludes my review of the Motorola Razr Plus from 2023. I can go on all day about this phone, but the biggest takeaway should be that Samsung and Google aren't the only ones in the folding phone game. Hope you enjoyed, and as always, thanks for watching.